On Press Perspective today, we touch upon South Korea's efforts to boost integration and to battle isolation within its society. Do stay with us. Hello, welcome to Press Perspective. It's Friday, August 8th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sunhee. From isolation to integration, today we discuss South Korea's initiatives aimed at addressing social concerns. For this, I have freelance journalist Raphael Rashid here in the studio. Raphael, welcome back.
Good to be back, thank you.
I also have writer Colin Marshall with us. Colin, it's great to have you here.
Glad to be here, thank you.
Raphael, let's start with your coverage of South Korea's efforts to chart a path to a multicultural future. First, let's start off with the details of your findings.
Sure. So I think it's fair to say that South Korea is approaching a kind of demographic milestone or tipping point with about 2.11 million foreigners living in this country. You have different, depends of course on who you ask, statistics. Some statistics include the tourists in this country, but I'm talking about the people who live here. And if you take the full population of the whole, that's about 4.2% of the population. So if you, according to the kind of experts, they will say that this is basically transitioning to a multicultural society, that we're passing the threshold very soon in the next 5 years, maybe 10 years. So of course the country is going through dramatic changes, and as a result the government is of course adapting to these changes and taking proactive measures to make sure that people feel welcomed or integrated. And so I guess we could call these maybe interventionist programs. So I visited a school where you have mentoring programs for children who cannot necessarily speak great Korean. There are these mentoring programs that have been deployed across the country in areas where there are many immigrant children. And so these programs help the kids learning Korean, learning different values in Korean society, and also mingling with different foreign friends and try to understand a bit more about Korean society. And these programs have been extremely popular across the country. So that's one aspect. And I think if you look at, say, the city of Ansan, just outside of Seoul, I guess you could call it the South Korea's multicultural laboratory, as you will. 14% of residents are of a foreign national background. And in one neighborhood in particular, Wongok-dong, the figure is 84% of people are from multicultural backgrounds. And so as a result, the city has invested a lot of money into infrastructure. You have centers like the Hope 365 Center that runs early adaptation programs for migrants who can come and learn these courses on integration in 18 different languages. And also there's many, there's after school care as well. And people can learn about, say, opening bank accounts, learn about Korean values, laws, human rights. So these places, again, very popular for the people who enroll and take these courses. But I guess on the flip side, of course, multiculturalism is inevitable in this society given the low birth rate and depleting countrysides or non-urban areas. But I think on the flip side, as much as foreign migrants have to adapt to this country, I think there's a bigger debate to be had about how Koreans themselves stand in terms of accepting these migrants and whether or not Koreans are ready to accept them.
Right. And let's talk about that with Colin then. So as Raphael mentioned, in terms of policy, government authorities appear committed to ensuring that their doors are open to foreign residents here in the country. What about in terms of community? As Raphael was questioning, are their doors wide open?
Well, I suppose yes and no is one possible answer there, but South Korea is not or has not been known historically as the most welcoming country for immigrants, and this is something Raphael has reported extensively on. That's, of course, changing. The reality underlying that is changing now, but it is also a two-way street. The expectations on Koreans to accept foreigners, to show an accepting attitude toward foreigners, will be accompanied by expectations of the foreigners to acculturate to South Korea. And sometimes that includes acculturating to elements of South Korean culture of which they may not personally approve. This is just the nature of the game, the nature of the phenomenon. But this casts my mind back to when I first came to Korea, and I would have these late nights with expat gatherings. You know, foreigners, much like myself demographically, they'd get deep in their cups, and then inevitably somebody would just go into a bit of a rant and say, like, if I got Korean citizenship and I learned Korean, they never did, but if I had all these things, when would I be Korean? No, they'd never accept me as Korean. They were just very bitter, frustrated that in their mind they could never become Korean. And they have a point. I myself believe that when I naturalize here, I won't be Korean in any sort of cogent sense other than a legal one. But my kids who are going to be born next week, they'll be, I think, broadly accepted as Korean. They'll look a little different, so I understand if they wouldn't be at first glance sometimes. Their kids certainly will be. I mean, this is a game of generations. Acculturation or becoming Korean happens over generations. There's no way around that. And this kind of frustrates me with some immigration expansion policies I've heard from different levels of government in Korea, because they tend to be focused on recruiting fully formed professionals from abroad, like a company recruiting employees. And that, to my mind, is not really immigration. I've used this analogy before, but if you want an orchard, you can't just move fully grown trees, they're going to die. You need to plant the seeds, and bring over immigrants, foreigners who are inclined or who are willing and able to acculturate to Korea. Their kids will become the professionals you want. Their kids certainly will, and they won't have any communication problems. They'll have become fully Korean. But this is something that a lot of proposed policies have not quite incorporated into their underlying, shall we say, philosophy of adaptation. I don't know quite how to put it, but the awareness is still coming along, I suspect.
Right. And while that is the case, though, the Japanese media, Raphael, recently touched upon South Korea's efforts to better accommodate its foreign workers, highlighting the access to language centers and support centers as well. How does Korea's efforts that is, with regard to its foreign workers compare to that of its neighbors?
Sure. I mean, you're referring to, there was recently coverage in Japan talking about this, and I think this coverage, in particular in Nikkei, was quite critical of Japan's own policies, saying that essentially different players in the region have kind of systematic infrastructure investment when it comes to catering to foreign populations. Whereas Nikkei reveals that Japan, as they say, fundamentally lacks this kind of coordinated command structure. So in Japan, they have an inter-ministerial office in the cabinet secretariat with about 80 staff, but these officials remain on secondment from the original ministries, creating bureaucratic silos. Nikkei notes that this kind of department was created as an election strategy just ahead of an election, and so no one's taking it very seriously. So essentially we have a situation where foreign migrants, of course, similar to Korea, are coming in greater numbers, but Japan lacks a unified policy approach. So I guess, if we come back to Korea, that's taken, I guess, a slightly different approach. As we've been mentioning, Korea's been building these kind of multicultural centers or places that support foreign workers nationwide, providing language courses, family support, after-school activities, and also increasing, of course, the number of foreign migrants quota every year. And I believe this year it's 130,000 that has been going up progressively over the years. When we look at Singapore, I think they have maybe a bit more of a centralized model. The Ministry of Manpower handles everything from visa issuance to worker management as a kind of single authority. You know, especially, I mean, of course, this would be very important in Singapore, given that of the population of 6 million, about a quarter are foreign nationals. So of course, I think it's maybe a bit more of it's a little bit of a different situation, given how many people there are of foreign backgrounds. Interestingly, I guess maybe not in the region, but even Nikkei has been looking at Canada, kind of painting it somewhat as a kind of gold standard for immigration, with the Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada Department that handles everything from policy development to permanent residency. So I guess, you know, overall, I guess it could be argued that Japan might need to change the way it looks at accepting foreigners across the board.
Right. Meanwhile, Colin, scholars say amid the growing presence of foreign immigrants here in the country, this reality is bound to lead to new social challenges, tasks that is. What are your thoughts regarding that reality?
Certainly, this is a subject I often return to. I read a column for the Dongailbo and recently, a few months ago, did a column on this, on lessons for Korea from the U.S. immigration situation. I'm from the U.S. and immigration, I get the impression, is one of the issues right now, one of the most charged issues in the U.S., if not the issue. And yes, it's limited. The number of lessons a country like Korea can learn from a country unlike itself is limited. And the US and South Korea are not very similar in any respect. Let's face it, South Korea is not a country defined by its institutions. That's not its self-image. The US is more of that, but the institutions of the Republic of Korea take up this much in a chapter, this chapter in a book this long. So it's natural that they wouldn't necessarily shape the self-image of the country that strongly compared to the US. I mean, here, it's the shared ethnicity of the vast majority of the population, even now that we have 1 out of 10 people a foreigner in South Korea. But when I was writing on this subject, I drew out from the US example one lesson in particular, or I suppose a word of caution perhaps for advocates of widened immigration to South Korea, which is that you don't want people to have the impression that immigration was increased without their consent. You don't want to give them the feeling that they were never consulted. And I think that's happening, it's happened in the US, whether it's here or there or in any country. If somebody wakes up in the morning and thinks their neighborhood is now much less recognizable to them than it was because 10% is foreign, 20% is foreign, 50% is foreign, even if they are not anti-immigrant, that can stoke negative feelings about it. If you think, well, I didn't vote for this, I didn't vote for anybody who promised this, so who made this happen? You know, this feeling of a lack of control. In the US certainly, there's a feeling that in this particular issue, or maybe most issues related to the outside world, including, for example, foreign wars, the US government is not responsive to the desires of its people. And that is one thing certainly to avoid here. So if the public can be consulted in a more thorough way, or at least not left with the impression that they're not to be represented in this process, I think that's important. The question to ask, really with any policy, but especially with immigration policy, is will bringing in more foreigners improve the lives of ordinary Koreans, the people who are here? If it will, okay, but if it won't, the people might say no, and if South Korea is to be kept among the democracies of the world, you've got to obey the public voice in that case. So this is ideally not a decision to be made from above, but I think you do get the sense people are feeling that that's what might be happening, in part because another sort of word of caution toward the advocates of more immigration in Korea, framing it as a sort of force of nature, as an inevitability, as multicultural Korea being something that will happen because of the birth rate. That's not quite true. You can argue that multiculturalism is a good solution to the low birth rate. You can make the case for it, but too often I'm seeing these days not making a case, just saying it will happen. Multiculturalism is coming. There's no way around it. More immigrants are coming. What are we going to do with that? Well, the government could shut that down right now. I mean, if they didn't want to let one more foreigner in, they don't have to. Well, there are complications to that, but even so, it's not inevitable. It's something that needs to be argued for cogently and to the public in a way that is based on their interests. And if that can't be done, maybe it shouldn't happen.
Right, something to think about right there then. Raphael, based on your observations on the ground then, what do you suppose are some of the pending tasks for Korea as we prepare for a broader multicultural society?
I mean, I think I agree a lot with what Colin has just said about the Korean public having a say in this, or at least consenting or understanding what is happening, as opposed to what the government might be. They might be doing these lovely multicultural centres and these integration programs, but I do believe the South Korean public also has to be part of it. I also do think there is a little bit of responsibility as well from the government side. I mean, I spoke to a researcher that said that the government's approach is fundamentally one-sided, and that there's the expectation on the foreigners to adapt to society. And I do agree with Colin that in a lot of cases, at least people, say, from the Western world will come here and believe that everything needs to be on a plate for them without ever needing to speak the local language. So I think, people who come here definitely need to make efforts to understand and appreciate this culture. But I do believe, I don't think it needs to be a heavy-handed approach, but at least maybe in schools teaching, or maybe just teaching Korean society in general. I don't know where this happens. My guess is it starts in school, that we live together, we coexist, and what does it mean to coexist together, and what does this multiculturalism society mean for you and for all of us who live here. I think there are some challenges when it comes to the structure of the way South Korea brings in foreigners to this country, especially foreign migrants who solve the problem of basically filling up the positions in the factories and in the fields. And there is the employment permit system, and I think there are plenty of documented cases where this system gives the employer a bit more of a disproportionate power over the workers, and makes it very difficult for the workers, if they are exploited, to escape or to change job. And there are many cases of exploitation. And I think even just last year we had the tragic case of the lithium battery factory where 23 workers died. Most of them were Chinese nationals. And I think that case highlights how foreign workers might be exposed to disproportionate workplace risks. So, I think, of course, it's good to have these kind of multicultural festivals and positive messaging, but I think it's also, to some extent, and again, not an expert, and again, we have to have a conversation about how this happens, but how do Koreans engage together in this kind of problem solving or problem sharing, so that everyone feels that they have a voice. If I may add one more task, I think would be legal protection. Korea has never enacted comprehensive anti-discrimination legislation, and I think that leaves migrants with little recourse when it comes to cases where they might face discrimination, even if it's in everyday life, or even whether it's when it comes to the banking sector of society, or housing, daily interactions, or maybe more severe cases. I think the law is it could be considered to be a bit symbolic, but at the same time, I think if we talk a bit more about the concept of discrimination, again, maybe at a younger age, I think that could be one of the solutions.
Right, for sure, raising awareness on a social level, of course. Moving forward, Colin, Raphael, you recently covered Seoul's campaign against loneliness and isolation among its residents. Could you tell us a bit about this coverage?
Yeah, so Seoul has launched an ambitious 5-year program to combat loneliness and isolation. It's called Seoul Without Loneliness. and they're investing, I think it's just over 450 billion won in this program. If my math is correct, I think that's about $350 million. The mayor of Seoul, Oh Se-hoon, describes it as an epidemic directly linked to the city's low happiness levels, high suicide rates, and depression. And at the kind of centerpiece of this program are these mind convenience stores. I think they basically resemble something between a kind of a cafe and a convenience store. I think these are solutions that are built deliberately to sidestep stigma, and basically it's built on the 편의점, the convenience store model, where you just walk in and you can just buy your milk and walk out. I've been to one of these centres in Dongdaemun. They have a branch there. So it's in the Dongdaemun Welfare Centre, and you go in and it's basically a space that resembles a bit of a cafe. You don't need to talk to anyone. There's a consultation room if you want to talk to someone. But it's basically a place where you can watch a film, maybe have coffee, have instant noodles as you would in a convenience store. And it targets people who are feeling lonely. And when I went there, I think what my takeaway was that from stepping into this place was there are many vulnerable people around us, and we might not necessarily see them or notice them, but they do exist, and this place where they can mingle, maybe make a few friends or not, there's no pressure whatsoever. This kind of place is a lifeline for these people, and even though we may live in this, very connected society with our smartphones, actually there is less, I would say, connections, human connections sometimes, and a lot of people feel that they can't even speak to another human being. The Seoul Loneliness kind of initiative also includes a 24-hour loneliness hotline, and they launched this, I think it was in April, and they had an annual target of 3,000 calls, but within 3 or 4 months they had already exceeded 10,000 calls. 6,000 of these calls, this is up until last month, 6,000 of these calls were simply people feeling lonely and needed to talk to someone else. So I guess it shows that there is something going on, and we need to address the situation. Seoul City wants to address loneliness before it becomes full-blown isolation and people just not coming out of their houses. And I think, I do believe this is an important initiative to be taking at this time in this country, but also around the world, because it's not a unique problem to Seoul, South Korea.
Right, for sure. Quite a number of scholars have said loneliness is now considered a crisis that needs collective effort by the government and the people. I'm afraid that's all the time we have today. Raphael, as always, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.
Colin, I remember you talking about the convenience stores quite a while back.
Yes,
but
we did.
Time
That's right.
limit, right? All right, Colin, thank you so much for your insights today.
Thank you, Sunhee.
Right, well, that is all for this edition of Press Perspective. Thank you for watching. Have a great weekend.